Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping to get a question into my colleague from Thornhill. I guess we ran out of time. But he started off his speech accusing the NDP of legislative vandalism. So I'm going to start off my speech talking about legislative vandalism. Legislative vandalism? How about the fact that we have had time allocation in this House, cutting off debate, effectively limiting democracy 82 times. He wants to talk about legislative vandalism. How about the fact that the Conservatives use in-camera proceedings for any kind of real debate or discussion that happens at committee? He wants to talk about legislative vandalism. How about the fact that the chair rules Chief Alan Adam, the chief of Fort Chip First Nations, out of order because he wants to talk about the downstream effects, the impacts of the oil sands on his people, and the chair says, oh, excuse me, Chief Allen, if you could actually wrap this up because we're here to talk about the benefits of the oil sands. If they want to talk about legislative vandalism, how about the fact that we are at third reading on this bill and we have yet to hear from the minister herself, not one word. Where is she? That is legislative vandalism. So, with my remaining time, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you indulge me and give me a bit of a warning towards the end of 3 or 4 minutes because I have a lot to say about this bill and I want to make sure I can get in my key points. So when this idea of Rouge Park becoming Rouge National Urban Park, when it was floated, we saw it in the throne speech. And that, you know, I'm not generally pretty happy with throne speeches, but I was really excited to see that there because I love the idea of Rouge National Urban Park, and the NDP is a great supporter of this idea. The idea of national urban parks to begin with, but the fact that Rouge Park could be the first. This is exciting stuff. I mean, imagine if we could have urban parks across Canada where people can take transit, public transit, to actually go see nature, be in nature, understand the cultural significance, the ecological significance of the space. So it's a great idea. And we're so excited about it that the NDP was actually successful at committee. We were doing a study on urban conservation, and we were successful at getting a couple of days of study about Rouge Park so we could get an update. We heard from Parks Canada, we heard from David Suzuki Foundation, Friends of the Rouge Watershed, and Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, and we really wanted an update. How are things going since the throne speech? What do we need to know? What are the areas that we need to work around or figure out? Where do we need to be creative? And in fact, we are so supportive of this idea of a national urban park at Rouge Valley that, in fact, my colleague, the member for Scarborough-Rouge River, is a patron of the Friends of the Rouge Watershed. So that's her personal commitment as a member of Parliament to say, I am engaged with this process, this is something that I support and I want to see come to fruition. So we're all really excited. We were all really excited when we saw this in the throne speech. What happened? Well, I will note that we have been very supportive of the work on the ground that's been done around Rouge Park. Local groups, provincial groups, national groups have worked for decades to make this happen. And this is something that they have been working on for decades. The idea of turning this into a national park, all of the national park status and national park protections that come with it. So imagine how excited that they were to see this in the throne speech as well. Imagine that they're actually at a point where they get to see everything they've worked on coming to fruition. It's really happening. And yet, I'm holding in my hand a news release that all these groups worked on together and sent to all members of Parliament. And I'm going to read from it because we're so excited about this park, but listen to this news release, Mr. Speaker. Dear members of Parliament, as organizations with a long-standing interest in establishing Rouge National Urban Park, we are writing to convey our grave concerns with Bill C-40. We urge you to oppose this bill at third reading. A more robust legislative framework is needed to ensure Canada's first national urban park will adequately protect the Rouge, an amazing natural treasure for Canadians today and into the future. We attempted to work constructively through the parliamentary process, supporting amendments to address major flaws in the bill when it was read before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development in late October and early November. Unfortunately, the committee rejected all proposed amendments. There's a piece in here, Mr. Speaker, about the problems with the bill, but I'll get to that in my speech, and I want to skip to the last paragraph because it's emotional, and it really lays out the situation for these groups. The province of Ontario has already informed Canada that it will not transfer its Rouge Park lands unless the bill governing the creation of the National Urban Park is amended to meet or exceed the environmental policies of existing Greenbelt and Rouge Park plans. Bill C-40 fails to meet this test. If Parliament proceeds with this flawed bill, the province's substantial Rouge Park lands, 25 or more square kilometres, may not be transferred to Parks Canada. The resultant Rouge National Urban Park will be less than half of the park's announced size and will not include the heartlands of the park, the beautiful Rouge Valley system. It will be a park in name only. Please oppose Bill C-40 at third reading and recommend that stronger legislation be drafted and brought back to the House. This was signed by the executive directors of Nature Canada, Environmental Defence, Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, David Suzuki Foundation, Friends of the Rouge Watershed, Ontario Nature, and the Storm Coalition. It is incredible to think that these groups would want us to vote against this bill, but that's the reality. My colleague, the member for Beaches East York, and I, after committee, we were faced with this decision. Well, none of the amendments were actually adopted. The NDP brought forward 19 amendments, and none of them were adopted. So we're faced with this decision of what do we do? What do we recommend to our colleagues on how to vote for this bill? And so a lot of these groups, including Friends of Rouge Watershed, Land Not Landings, Ontario Nature, they said, come to the park. We'll take you on a tour of the park and we'll talk to you about what needs to happen. So we did that last Monday, Mr. Speaker, the two of us, and it was incredible. People have worked so hard to protect this land over the years in the hopes that one day it could become a national urban park. And so after this incredible tour of farmland and wetlands and beach and the valley, at the end of the day, we all gathered together in an environmental education center for young people, and they spelled it out, and they said, we want you to vote against this bill. So how did we get here? How is it that these groups are pushing us to vote against it? I mean, it's not like we don't understand compromise, Mr. Speaker. You can't let perfect be the enemy of the good, that's the saying. And we had a similar situation here with Sable Island National Park. If you remember that debate here in the House, Sable Island National Park is in my riding of Halifax. And we had similar issues with the bill where it wasn't quite where we needed it to be. So what do? We engage with the legislative process. We brought forward amendments. Those amendments were rejected. It's kind of to be expected with the Conservatives these days, but we still do it in good faith. But you know what? At the end of the day, I realized that this park, Sable Island National Park, that legislation would carve out a protected area in the middle of a gas field. So this is a natural gas field. It's a unique situation. So it would carve out a protected area. And I knew that on the Monday, there could be drilling in that national park. But if we passed that legislation on the Tuesday, there would no longer be the right to drill in that park. So it was worth it. Even though the bill wasn't perfect, even though we brought forward amendments and they were rejected, the bill wasn't perfect, we still supported it. I'm incredibly proud of that work, and we will continue to work to make the legislation and make the park management plan robust and strong and put in the proper protections for that park. But we did support that. But Rouge National Urban Park is different because this legislation crosses a line. It crosses a line. So it obviously is a precedent-setting bill because, the park is a precedent. I mean, the park is the first national urban park in an urban setting. And like I said, you can access it by public transit. It creates a new model for protecting areas in an urban setting because you have to take into consideration the presence of highways. The 407. We were overlooking the Rouge Valley the other day, and I could hear the roar of the 401, even though I was looking at this beautiful nature valley. It was incredible. So there's roads, there's highways, there's railway lines, there's farming. So it has to be different. A precedent will be set. But there's a negative precedent here, Mr. Speaker, and that's around ecological integrity. We heard the member from Thornhill talk about ecological integrity, and he said that we can't protect ecological integrity in an urban park. Well, I disagree. I disagree. So if you look at the national, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name, the National Canada Parks Act, I just want to get it correct, Parks Canada Agency Act. If you look at that act, it actually does talk about the first priority being the maintenance or restoration of ecological integrity. So maintenance, keeping ecological integrity, or restoration, that's improvement of ecological integrity. We have the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they have a definition of a protected area. And they talk about a clearly defined geographical space, recognized, dedicated, and managed, et cetera, to achieve the long-term conservation of nature associated with ecosystem services and cultural values. So different words, but same idea. They're talking about conservation of nature. I would say that the prioritization of ecological health or ecological integrity, that's all conservation. So what do we have here? We have something totally different in this bill. I'm going to read it verbatim. And I think you'll be shocked, Mr. Speaker, because this bill says the minister must, in the management of the park, take into consideration the protection of natural ecosystems and cultural landscapes and the maintenance of its native wildlife and health of these ecosystems. So we go from prioritization, we go from improving and maintaining to, yeah, you should probably think about it. And that's not acceptable, Mr. Speaker. It's not acceptable in the least. And so I hear my colleague from Thornhill, and I heard all of the arguments at committee and at second reading from the Conservatives saying, you just can't do it when, we can't do a burn off of a forest when there's the highway going through it and there's houses. You can't possibly, we're not going to rip up the farms and plant trees to restore the natural ecosystem. Well, you know what? No one was asking for that. No one was asking for that. And when we were at committee, we had incredible testimony, Mr. Speaker, from environmental groups, from local organizations, and from farming groups. And the Conservatives would have you believe that it's like this environmentalist and farmer fight, and never the two shall meet. Well, that's not the case. Everybody was perfectly reasonable at committee. Everybody came and said, look, we want to protect farms. The farmers said we want to protect our livelihood, but we want to see a park. The environmental groups said we want to protect farms and we want to see a park. Everybody was reasonable. There was a way to figure this out. There was a way to come to a compromise. Protect the farmland. Make sure we don't have silly rules that say we have to set fire to the 407 every 10 years to stimulate new growth. I mean, come on, right? We're smart people. We're legislators. We've got Parks Canada. We've got legal drafters. I know them. They're smart people. We can figure out a way around this. So what the NDP proposed, we proposed many things because there are a number of flaws with this bill, but around this issue of prioritization of ecosystem health or ecological prioritization, we proposed we replace this section 6, and say the minister must, in the management of the park, prioritize improvement of the health of the park's ecosystem. Okay, so we're talking about prioritization. It's not saying, we have to do outrageous things that don't make any sense. We're just prioritizing the improvement of the health of the park's ecosystem. But then we put in a subsection 2. For greater certainty, the minister must recognize and take into consideration the ongoing presence of agriculture in the park. And I think that's important because, when I hear the Conservatives saying, well, what about the farmers? What are we going to do about the farmers? Well, hey, let's spell it out. So we are going to take into consideration the ongoing presence of farms in the park. So ongoing, not, well, there's farms today, but, secretly this is a conspiracy to rip up all the farms and plant trees. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about protecting the agriculture in the park. And I'm going to read you a couple of quotes from committee because they're so simple and straightforward. So we had, this is actually Faisal Mullah, if I can find his quote. Right, so Faisal Mullah is from the David Suzuki Foundation, and he said, "We do not believe that maximizing ecological health and support for agriculture are mutually exclusive objectives in the park. The David Suzuki Foundation supports sustainable farming in the park." Point final. I mean, that is perfect. When I look at, actually, Kim Empringham, she's with the York Region of Agriculture, and she was wonderful at committee, and she understood compromise, and she understood coming together to try and reach consensus, and she actually said, the two of the guiding principles for the Rouge National Urban Park are to maintain and improve ecological health and scientific integrity, and to respect and support sustainable agriculture and other compatible land uses. So, point final. I mean, we have a woman who testified on behalf of farmers, a man who testified on behalf of environmental groups, and they're saying the same thing. So what I don't understand, Mr. Speaker, is why we have this fake fight, why we have this pretend, argument over, well, we can't do this. We can do it. We came up with a solution. That one amendment would solve all the problems that we're having, in my opinion. So what did we do? I want to talk a little bit about the political process. We worked really hard within this process to create the best bill possible. And if you will remember, Mr. Speaker, at second reading, the NDP, we weren't combative on this. We said, yeah, let's get this to third reading. I think we actually fast-tracked it a little bit, said we'll put up just a certain number of speakers because we're really eager to get our, roll up our sleeves and get to work at committee and deal with this. So in our speeches, we said, let's come up with a solution. We can do this. We can figure this out. We had quite supportive yet tempered speeches in the House. They were really interesting. We heard from MPs mostly in the Toronto area because they know the park so well, and it was MPs who really wanted to say something about this park and to help be a part of navigating the path forward. So the speeches were excellent. We then worked with different groups. Sometimes it's back and forth. Sometimes you're on the phone a lot. Someone says, well, what about this word? And you are the go-between person, Mr. Speaker, from your background in law. You're negotiating that. But we did it. And we came up with this good amendment for Section 6 and really good language. So what we had to do was talk to these grassroots organizations who want to protect farming in the park and yet recognize farms as another unique aspect of this park. And I think we did it. So what's left here? We did bring forward, the NDP did bring forward 19 amendments at committee. It was a pleasure working with my colleagues, my NDP colleagues on this, because they really took it to heart. They really did want to make sure that this bill was better. So kudos to the MP from Scarborough Southwest and the MP from Scarborough Rouge River for the work that they did. We lost that fight, Mr. Speaker. So we're going to take the advice of these groups who are on the ground, who want to see this urban national park more than anything, but not at the expense of creating a bad precedent for urban parks from here on out. We're going to take their advice and we will vote against this bill. But we support this park. So what do? Well, we've started that work already, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues and I, in particular the member for Scarborough Rouge River, we've been sitting down with, for example, this amendment to Section 6 and other amendments, and we're going to put together a bill. We're going to put together a private member's bill that would lay out what the NDP will do when we're government, how we will change this bill to actually protect ecological integrity, yet ensure the ongoing presence of agriculture in the park. We are going to bring forward this bill. I'm going to be so proud to do that. I hope I get to second the bill, hint, hint. Because we can do this. We can have an incredible urban national park. We can make it the jewel in the national park crown, and set a positive precedent for urban parks to come. So that's what we're working on, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to the introduction of that bill, and we really will lay out how we can make this happen, protecting all the interests that need to be protected, including the health of this ecosystem. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll take the member at her words, but when we talk about this, she talks about the environmentalists. Well, let's look at what they said. Ontario Nature, Carolyn Schultz, when asked about farming, she said, yes, we want farming in the park, but she then went on to say, but there are certain types of farming that would not be compatible in the park. So if you're a farmer doing that, adios. Jim Robb, 600-meter corridor on the farm. He himself said 1,700 acres of Class 1 farmland out of production. Parks Canada estimates 2,000 acres of Class 1 farmland out of production, Mr. Speaker. So you can't have it both ways. The member herself spoke against ecological integrity in the park. She spoke against ecological integrity because she recognized it can't happen in this particular park. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say that you support farmers in the park, but then turn around and say you're going to tell them what to farm, where to farm, and how to farm in the park. These people have suffered for 40 years when they were first expropriated by the Trudeau Liberal government. They deserve certainty. They deserve to be allowed to farm what they want, how they want, using best farm practices in the lands that many of them were expropriated from, Mr. Speaker. That's the reality in this area. So I asked my colleague, does she not recognize the fact that the people that she mentioned, who are all supporting the amendments that they brought forward, don't actually live or work in the park? So if you live, work, or play in the Rouge, if you're a farmer in the Rouge, Kim Impringham supports our legislation. If you're a ratepayer, you support our legislation, and you actually sent a letter to us supporting that legislation, Mr. Speaker. Live, work, play in the Rouge, you support it. If you're an outside agency who has no business of telling the people in this area what to do and how to do it, then you want these amendments which have only one purpose, and that's to kill farming. You can't have it both ways. So I wonder if the member would just be honest and actually admit to the fact that the amendments, the vast majority of the amendments brought forward, did one thing, spoke of ecological integrity, which would eliminate farming from the Rouge.
The Honourable Member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his question. And I know that he does have the best interests of something. Sorry, I'm blanking on the word. He does have some of the best interests of the park at heart here, and I know that he has worked hard on this. But I disagree with him. I really do disagree with him. It's not adios. Okay, to use his word. It's not adios to farming. We're talking about sustainable agriculture. Let's look at the fact that right now these farms only have a one-year lease. Well, if you're a farmer, Mr. Speaker, and you only have a one-year lease, how much improvement are you going to make on your farm to make it more sustainable? Even something as easy, so to speak, as tiling for drainage. You make that investment, it's going to take you a number of years to recoup that investment. So just we need to look at the fact that they have one-year leases, that they haven't been able to implement some of the sustainable farming practices that we would come to expect. And I wouldn't think that Friends of Rouge Watershed would be considered to be an outside agency. I mean, these groups have worked really hard. Every single one of them at committee said, we're not talking about getting rid of the farms. And I would suggest in the amendment that I talked about at length here in the House, it says, also the ongoing presence of agriculture. So when he says it can't happen, we can't protect ecological integrity, I say it can. All we need to do is be creative, look at an amendment like what the NDP brought forward, and we can solve these problems, not just throw up our hands and walk away from them.
Comments? Question commentaire. The Honourable Member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
I wanted to thank the Honourable Member for her speech. I thought it was a thoughtful speech, and I thought she drew out the issues quite well. I would want to have her focus on Section 6, which says that Minister must take into consideration. She emphasized the point, take into consideration. Well, what's that actually mean? And then there's 4 things that they're supposed to take into consideration: protection of natural ecosystems, cultural landscapes, native wildlife, and health of ecosystems, none of which is defined in the legislation. So it's a case of everything is a priority. Well, if everything is a priority, then really nothing is a priority. And the consequence of that is that the people who the legislation purports to protect, as the honourable member previous said, is very concerned about the farmers. Well, we're all very concerned about the farmers, but the farmers are actually as vulnerable as anyone else in the park, because if there are no priorities, i.e. if there's everything's a priority and nothing, therefore nothing is a priority, well, you get a minister there who is hawkish, shall we say, who has no fettering of his or her discretion, then the farmers could be far more vulnerable than they think they are. So this, she rightly sets up this false food fight between the ecologists and the farmers. The crazy part of the whole thing is that it leaves the farmers as vulnerable as it leaves everyone else. And that is why she's right to emphasize the point that definitions matter. We are legislators. We work on definitions. So I put it to the honourable member that she, like I, is quite disappointed in how this is, has turned out over these last few weeks and months.
Honourable member for Halifax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his question and the work that he did at committee questioning witnesses, and I know this is something that he's a neighbouring MP as well. There's a number of neighbouring MPs to this park, and I know that we all want to see this park. It's just how do we get there? And he points out something, actually, I'll admit, I didn't think about it, this definition piece. Certainly, you know, the NDP brought forward amendments to actually define ecological health and ecological integrity. So absolutely, we are legislators. We need to have those definitions. We need to talk about what it is we want to do and spell it out. And sometimes a definition of ecological health or ecological integrity would specifically exclude something. If you want to exclude the 407, for example. But he brings up a really good point about you know, the definitions of all these things that the minister is supposed to be doing now, these 6 things that the minister is supposed to be doing now, and that could potentially put the farmers at risk. It makes me think about some discussion that we had, I don't remember if it was at committee or if it was here in the House, about the park management plan, where the Conservatives are saying, oh, trust us. Just trust us. Everything will be in the park management plan. You'll be really happy. Well, you know what? The management plan is not legislation. Management plan is policy. There is a big difference between policy and legislation. And it could be the whim of a minister to say, oh, yeah, this management plan, we're not into that anymore. What we're going to do is X or Y. So where are the protections for farmers? Why isn't that legislated, like in the NDP amendment that we brought forward? Why isn't ecological health defined? Definitions matter. It's our job as legislators. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Scarborough Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague from Halifax for her excellent speech on this idea, on this topic, and it clearly goes to show how vested she is as well in protecting this beautiful park that's in my backyard. And a large part of the current park is in my riding of Scarborough Rouge River. And I want to outline that the current Rouge Park is protected under over 10 different patchwork system of protection of the Rouge Park Management Plan of '94, the Rouge Park North Management Plan, the Provincial Greenbelt Plan, the Toronto Lake Ontario Area of Concern Remedial Action Plan. There's Rouge Watershed. There's so many different patchwork of plans that are protecting the Rouge Valley and the larger ecosystem and the park lands. And in committee, we heard the minister and many other people say, oh, well, those are all patchwork system. This bill is going to be good. This bill is going to be better at protecting the lands, protecting the park. And we know that in January of 2013, the federal government signed a memorandum agreeing to meet or exceed Ontario's existing policies in protecting the Greenbelt and Oak Ridges Moraine conservation plans. So now we're seeing from the media release and letters sent to all members of Parliament by 7 different organizations on the ground in the community, as well as national organizations, that are saying this bill is not good. This bill is not protecting the park more than what is already existing. And My question to my honourable colleague is, what is it that is there anything else that we could have done to make sure that this park is actually protected by this federal legislation?
Honourable member for Halifax, you only have about 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to my colleague for her question. She really did drill down to the issue here of the existing protections are stronger than what will happen with this national park if the lands are transferred. So this new legislation does not meet or exceed the existing protections in place. What else could we have done? I think we did everything we could, Mr. Speaker, but that means that we have to think about what comes next, and that's why I am really excited about our solution of bringing forward a private member's bill that would spell out what it is the NDP will do when we form government, what we will do to this park, how we will actually bring it up to the standard that is acceptable, protect that ecological integrity while also protecting the other activities that are happening in the park. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.